What would you do if your wife's best friend showed up at your door in tears and asked, "Do you really know the woman you married?" What Mark discovered next changed his life forever and revealed a sacrifice no one saw coming. Before this unforgettable story begins, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, could you keep a secret like this for true love? Mark Sullivan had always believed that peace was something a man built slowly, one honest day at a time. His home stood in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado, where the mornings smelled of pine trees and fresh coffee, and the evenings usually passed with soft lights glowing through kitchen windows. After 12 years of marriage to Sarah, Mark thought he understood the shape of his life. There were no grand surprises, no dangerous secrets, no shadows waiting behind closed doors. He was a husband, a homeowner, and a man who trusted the woman sleeping beside him every night. That Thursday evening began like any other rainy night in Colorado. The sky had turned dark before sunset, and cold drops tapped against the windows with steady rhythm. Sarah had gone upstairs early, saying she had a headache, while Mark stayed in the living room, half watching the local news and scrolling through messages on his phone. The house felt calm, almost too calm, wrapped in the kind of silence that usually brought comfort. Outside, the streetlights blurred through the rain, painting silver lines across the driveway. Mark had no reason to think anything was wrong. Then came the knock. It was not loud, but it carried a strange urgency, 3 quick taps followed by one heavier strike. Mark looked toward the front door, confused. They were not expecting anyone, and visitors rarely came without calling first. For a moment, he waited, thinking maybe the sound had come from a loose shutter or a branch hitting the porch. But then the knock came again, sharper this time. He stood slowly, feeling an uneasy tightness in his chest, and walked through the hallway toward the door. When Mark opened it, the cold air rushed inside first. Then he saw her. A woman stood on the porch under the weak yellow light, soaked from the rain, her dark hair clinging to her face. It took him a few seconds to recognize Emily Carter, Sarah's childhood best friend. Mark had only met her twice in all the years he had been married. Both times at family events where she had seemed polite but distant. Now she looked nothing like the composed woman he remembered. Her eyes were red, her lips trembled, and her hands were shaking. "Emily," Mark said, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" She tried to answer, but no words came out. Her breathing was uneven, as if she had been crying for hours before reaching his door. Rainwater dripped from her coat onto the porch boards, but she did not seem to notice. Instead, she kept staring past him, into the house, like she was afraid of who might appear behind him. Mark stepped aside and said, "Come in. You're freezing." Still, she hesitated, as though crossing that doorway meant there would be no turning back. Finally, Emily stepped inside. Mark closed the door behind her and led her toward the living room. She did not sit immediately. She stood near the couch, clutching the strap of her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Mark grabbed a towel from the hallway closet and handed it to her, but she barely used it. Her eyes moved around the room, landing on framed photos of Mark and Sarah, their wedding day, a trip to Yellowstone, a Christmas morning years ago. Each picture seemed to make Emily's face fall even more. Mark felt his concern turn into fear. "Is Sarah okay?" he asked quickly. "Did something happen?" Emily shook her head, but that only made the silence heavier. Upstairs, the house remained quiet. The rain continued beating softly against the windows, but inside the room, every sound felt too loud, the clock ticking. Emily's shaky breathing, Mark's own heartbeat. He wanted a simple explanation, something ordinary, something that could be fixed with a phone call or a warm cup of tea. But Emily's face told him this was not ordinary. She looked at him with tears gathering again in her eyes. "Mark, I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I promised her I would never come. I promised I would never say anything." Mark's stomach tightened. "Promised who?" "Sarah." Emily lowered her gaze, and that small movement answered him before she spoke. He felt the room shift around him, as if the safe walls of his home had suddenly become unfamiliar. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of trust, and now a woman from Sarah's past was standing in his living room talking about promises. Mark tried to stay calm, but his voice came out harder than he intended. "Emily, you need to tell me what's going on." She wiped her face with trembling fingers and took a slow breath. For a moment, she looked toward the staircase again, and Mark followed her gaze. Sarah was still upstairs, unaware that her past had walked through the front door in tears. Emily finally turned back to him. Her expression was full of guilt, fear, and something else, pity. That look frightened Mark more than anything she had said so far. After a long silence, Emily spoke in a voice so low he almost missed it. "Before I say anything else, I need you to answer one question." Mark stared at her, unable to move. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his, and whispered, "Do you really know the woman you married?" The words landed like a heavy blow. Mark felt his heartbeat quicken. He wanted to reject the question, to defend Sarah instantly, but something in Emily's tears stopped him. He stood there, trapped between love and doubt, as the rain kept falling outside. Mark did not answer right away. Images of Sarah filled his mind, her gentle smile, the way she held his hand during difficult days. The quiet sadness she sometimes carried when she thought no one noticed. He had always believed that sadness belonged to old memories she did not want to discuss. Now he wondered if he had mistaken silence for peace. Emily opened her handbag and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges bent and stained by time. She placed it carefully on the coffee table. Mark looked down at it, suddenly afraid of the truth waiting inside. Emily took a deep breath and placed the old sealed envelope on the kitchen table. The room felt colder than before, even though the heater was running. Mark stared at the envelope as if it were alive, as if opening it would change the meaning of every memory he had built with Sarah. Emily's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Sarah begged me never to tell you," she said quietly. "But I can't stay silent anymore." Mark looked from her tearful face to the envelope, his mind racing through every terrible possibility a husband could imagine. His hands moved slowly toward it. The paper felt dry, old, and fragile beneath his fingers. For a moment, he almost pushed it back. Part of him did not want to know. Part of him wanted to run upstairs, wake Sarah, and demand that she explain everything herself. But Emily's expression held him in place. He broke the seal carefully and pulled out faded photographs, hospital records, and a handwritten letter dated 11 years earlier. The date struck him immediately. It was the same year his younger brother, Daniel, had almost died after a devastating highway accident. Mark's throat tightened. Daniel had been only 24 at the time, full of dreams, engaged to be married, and convinced life would always wait for him. Then one icy night outside Boulder, a truck lost control and crashed into his car. The weeks after that had been a blur of hospital hallways, unanswered prayers, and doctors speaking in careful voices. Mark remembered Sarah being there every day, holding his hand, bringing coffee, comforting his mother, and staying strong when everyone else broke apart. But these documents suggested she had done far more than simply stand beside him. He unfolded the medical papers with shaking hands. At first, the words seemed impossible to understand. Donor evaluation. Surgical consent. Partial liver transplant. Sarah Sullivan. Mark read her name again and again, hoping he had misunderstood. He looked up at Emily, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No," he whispered. "That can't be right." Emily covered her mouth as fresh tears slipped down her face. "It is right," she said. Sarah was the match. She donated part of her liver to save Daniel's life. She made the doctors keep it confidential, and she made me promise never to tell you. Mark sank into the nearest chair. The kitchen around him blurred. For years, he had believed an anonymous donor had saved Daniel, someone connected through a private registry, someone they had never been able to thank. His family had prayed for that stranger, spoken of that stranger with gratitude, and wondered what kind of person could give such a gift. All this time, that person had been living under his roof, cooking beside him, laughing with him, sleeping next to him, and carrying a scar he had once noticed but never fully questioned. He remembered the scar now. Years ago, he had seen it across Sarah's side and asked about it. She had smiled faintly and said it was from an old surgery before they married. Mark had accepted her answer because he trusted her, because love often makes a person believe silence is the same as honesty. Now the memory hurt. Not because she had saved Daniel, but because she had carried the truth alone. Emily slid the handwritten letter across the table. She wrote this before the surgery, Emily said. She asked me to give it to you only if the truth ever needed to come out. Mark opened the letter with trembling fingers. Sarah's handwriting filled the page, soft and familiar. She had written that she loved him too much to let his brother die if she could help. She wrote that she did not want Mark to feel trapped by gratitude, duty, or guilt. She wanted their marriage to remain a choice, not a debt. If she survived, she wanted silence. If she did not, she wanted Mark to know she had done it freely, with no regret. By the time Mark finished reading, tears were falling freely onto the paper. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rain against the windows and Mark's uneven breathing. Emily sat across from him, looking exhausted by the weight she had carried for over a decade. Why now? Mark asked finally. Emily wiped her eyes. Because Sarah has been sick again, she said. She didn't want to worry you, but her last checkup scared her. She keeps acting like everything is fine, but I couldn't watch her protect everyone while no one knew what she had already sacrificed. Mark stood so suddenly the chair scraped against the floor. He rushed upstairs, taking the letter with him. The bedroom door was partly open, and Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out at the rain. Somehow, she already knew. Maybe she had heard voices. Maybe she had been waiting for this moment for years. When Mark entered, she looked at the envelope in his hand, then at his tear-filled eyes. Her face broke with quiet sadness. I'm sorry, she whispered. Mark crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice breaking. Sarah placed a trembling hand on his cheek. Because I didn't save Daniel to become a hero, she said softly. I did it because he was your brother, and because your pain was my pain. I never wanted you to look at me like you owed me your life. Mark shook his head, tears running down his face. I don't owe you my life, he whispered. But I do owe you the truth of my love. He took her hands and kissed them gently. You were never just my wife, Sarah. You were the miracle our family never knew how to thank. By morning, the storm had passed. Mark called Daniel and his parents, and together they learned the truth that had been hidden for 11 years. There was shock, there were tears, and there was a silence so deep it felt like prayer. Daniel came over first, unable to speak when he saw Sarah. He simply held her and cried like a little boy. Sarah kept saying she did not want attention, but Mark understood now that love hidden in silence still deserved to be honored. Not with grand speeches, but with care, honesty, and presence. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began treatment, surrounded by the family she had once protected in secret. Emily stayed close, finally free from the promise that had weighed on her heart. Mark never looked at Sarah with pity or debt. He looked at her with deeper respect, deeper tenderness, and a love stronger than before. Years later, when people asked what saved their marriage, Mark always gave the same answer: a question at the door, an envelope on the table, and a woman who taught me that real love does not ask to be seen, it simply gives.